Well, first of all, Jim, thank you for taking the time. I know how busy you are this time of year, but we think it's important to get the word out to the business community about the very bold initiative that the governor has rolled out, a 30-year plan to reinvest in our transportation infrastructure. So I thought maybe I'd start by just having you talk a little bit about the philosophy that went into that, the vision that you and the governor had in putting this 30-year, $100 billion plan together, and how you came to the scope and scale of it. And
Sure.
just give the background on it.
For 120 years, we've never addressed the real needs of Connecticut. And every year, in every administration at the DOT, every commissioner, the report is, well, we didn't have enough money, so we could only do this much, and our roads are congested, and we're not generating economic business, and the conditions are getting deteriorated, and it repeats itself for 12 decades. And that's where we are. And if we continue to go forward with plans that do nothing but spend resources that we can count on that are at risk, then we will be completely at risk as a state. So that's the inevitability of what is a federal program at risk. We've been through it for a couple years where the federal government has said we may not reauthorize the fund, and the fund is going bankrupt. And last year, the year before, and coming this May is the threat that we could actually have to stop federal funding based on federal dollars.
Right.
So if you're going to behave at risk and you can only do projects based on what you think you're going to have in the future, then you don't plan ahead, you don't develop projects ahead, and you never get ahead. So we're facing a short-term issue of the state trust fund being tapped out by the end of 2017. In addition to that, we have this long-term idea that we'd like to be more progressive and really encourage economic growth. So I met with the governor 4 years ago to present this and say, can we start working on this? Shouldn't we do something now? And we need a big plan to do this. And his reaction, and I actually presented my thoughts about the size and scope and scale of that, and looked at the highway system, and looked at the rail and bus system, looked at our pedestrian bicycle system, and gave some ideas. And he said, well, look, we have a lot to do. And this is not something, this is so comprehensive that it's going to take time to do. But by the way, it's not bold enough. So there's two dimensions. What have we heard? What have we heard, and what does the governor think we should move toward? And I think what we heard from the public in many ways was two different messages, but very clear messages. One was that what we have today, the existing system, really needs to be fixed. It's just not where it needs to be. And the governor translates that in his language to best in class, as opposed to let's continue to be, I don't know, a gentleman C or C minus, constantly 44th out of 50 states on pavement condition, bridges in bad condition, it looks poor all over the place, and that's true. I mean, we've been managing to keep conditions about where they are with a little improvement, and that's all we've achieved. And he said, but what does that do? It does nothing to improve conditions in terms of the big problems we're facing. All of the interchanges that have missing links, missing pieces, so you can't get where you want to go. All the delays for, major interchanges like the Charter Oak Bridge to 84, the 20 to 40 minute every morning and every night congestion on I-95 and in Fairfield County, and 84 in Hartford, and 84 in Danbury, and 95 in Southeast Connecticut. It's all a problem. And those are the things that get translated by the TRIP report into $4.2 billion of cost. Right? So if we're willing to accept $4.2 billion of cost on the negative side, how do you turn it around to be profit, right? And moving the economy forward, and you do that by getting rid of those impediments. So that's why he's proposed, widening projects to get more capacity on our highways, investments in extending our bus system by 25% over where it is, and actually not just extending it, but maybe connecting the right people to the right places. Building our rail system to be a very, very efficient subway-like system and fast system at the same time, so that it has more capacity and economic development opportunity. And a substantial system for the quality of life issues around bicycle and pedestrian safety and trail systems. When you put that all together and you add it all up, it's $100 billion, and I must say that's bolder than where I started.
It's a bold number.
It's a bold number. So let's put it in. And then he said, look, I know that that's big, and I know we got to talk about that. And so there's a proposal that needs time to be vetted and understood and bought into. But at an instinctive level, at what we heard from the public, and what we've been hearing for years are these things just have needed attention and they're not being done. And it's because the DOT can't start a project using federal funds unless we know there's federal funds to pay for them. So we never start anything because we can't finish them.
Right.
And that's just this vicious downward cycle. You're never ready to advance anything for the future.
Let's jump quickly to funding. I know that the governor is putting together a panel of experts, people with finance backgrounds, transportation backgrounds, to come up with recommendations. Can you talk a little bit about where that stands right now, or you've made any appointments to it yet? What's the timetable to come up with some recommendations, and what are your expectations regarding outcomes?
I can only talk about the last piece. I really don't know what the appointment process is at this point. The governor has asked for recommendations, and I'm sure he's going to weigh those, so I don't know where that stands. The goal, I think, is to put a group in place within the next couple weeks, month, or whatever, to start the process with a short time frame turnaround on making some recommendations with people outside of state government, outside of this process, because we're too close to it. I think if you take a look at what traditional thinking could bring to the table, you're going to get traditional ideas back, and traditional ideas are going bankrupt. So we really need to rethink a lot of things. The financing piece of it, the funding piece of it, so two parts. Where's the money come from? What kind of financing strategies? Maybe that gets linked with project delivery as well, in terms of how you do things as part of evaluating public-private partnerships and other things in terms of executing this. And really, what is the right mix of cash versus debt for what projects over a long term? Because this is the 30-year plan is maybe a 30-year plan, but it's not going to be. Projects will happen over the course of that. We'll be paying for projects under the normal circumstance for years and years after that. That's just the last project in is still going to be paid for 20 years later in bonds.
Right.
So it's at least a 50-year plan to fund, and we really are looking for, I know the governor's looking for that sort of total independence, take a fresh look at what's happened, and you have to understand where we are today, because part of what we're going to have to deal with in the next couple of years is this 2018 issue. And let me just make a point that the governor's 5-year ramp-up plan is one that can be paid for in the first couple years with the existing STF. But even without the 5-year plan, we have to do something in 2018.
Right.
Because if you start designing projects, you're really not paying for them now, we're going to pay for them later. It's just getting us to a place where we can make the right decisions.
So certain things like you mentioned the airport authority, the port authority, it's possible to create an authority around this, or privatizing certain things. So it's all going to be on the table for discussion.
Absolutely. Everything is on the table.
And I hate to raise this issue, but I don't want to dwell on it, but just to clarify a little bit, because there's so much in the media, so much in the Capitol about tolls. Border tolls, congestion pricing on new lanes that might be created, a full-blown tolling system. I'm told that it's going to be so expensive, we're not going to do it. I hear all these rumors where the administration is, at least at this point in time. Can you just talk briefly about what you think is a reasonable expectation people should have around tolling in Connecticut, and where the administration will be?
Sure. Well, obviously, there's a lot of stuff out there,
right?
And then I'll just call it stuff because that's what it is right now. My position, or our role in this, my role in this, is to, as best as we can, to provide facts and information to inform a discussion, probably as part of the financing group, right? We're probably a month or so away, order of magnitude, from providing results from the 2 congestion pricing studies or value pricing initiatives that we have underway. They are extraordinarily broad and comprehensive and careful studies of 2 things: I-95, congestion pricing, value pricing, and Hartford area I-84, where detailed evaluation of travel, diversions, pricing, implementation, scope, will all be part of a menu of what could be done and what does it yield from a congestion point of view, from a capacity point of view, and from a revenue and cost perspective, because those facts don't exist yet. That's all they do, and I don't want to minimize that, but that doesn't, we haven't studied through those anything else, right? So if it comes to border tolls, we haven't looked at border tolls. If it comes to statewide tolling, we haven't looked at statewide tolling. The two federally funded pilot studies are what could happen if we implemented value pricing in two places. That's informative and will be helpful, and some of that background work can influence and update, I think, the report that was done by Cambridge about sort of more systemic, if you will, opportunities. So I hope to provide that over the course of the next couple of months as a backdrop for informed decision making.
And as you know, there's some key leaders in the legislature pushing pretty hard on this, so we'll see where it comes out. But
so let me just put it in some perspective. And this is not for or against, one way or the other. If today's program is $7.2 billion over 5 years, and we know that that's got funding, pressures against it starting in 18 big time, so that the current mechanisms aren't going to work, and we want to update that to do a jumpstart 5-year plan, and then we want to get to $100 billion over 30 years. There's no magic bullet. It doesn't matter which one we pick. There's not a magic bullet that will do it all.
Another big issue in the business community, and it has been for years, and I assume also a frustration for you and other DOT commissioners, is diversion of funds from the Special Transportation Fund. The governor has talked about either in terms of a lockbox or constitutional amendment. That might be out of your purview about how we do this. I'm just curious, with your experience in New Jersey, do you have any thoughts you can share with us today about the best ways to do that, or is that something that you leave to other people?
A little bit of history about what's not a good way. So I'll go back to my 120-year history. I'll go back to the 1920s, where a commissioner said, our roads are in poor shape. They don't connect where they're supposed to. They're congested. We need to get the public to understand this to generate money to pay for these improvements. And what do you know? The legislature voted for a tax increase to address that, and they promptly took it and did not spend it on transportation. So it sounds like this is, deja vu all over again, and we don't learn from history. So I think this, let's change that course. Again, it's time to draw the line in the sand. We're not going to do that again.
The plan obviously is around infrastructure investment, but are you looking at other things that a lot of companies in Fairfield County have begun to implement as congestion mitigation plans, having people work home one day a week? When you look at other major projects that are going to have to be undertaken, and look at the disruption that might have toward the business community, whether it's the Mixed Master and Waterbury or the Viaduct 84 Viaduct in Hartford, are there going to be any incentives built in for employers to adopt congestion mitigation plans to help offset some of the problems as you're going through the investment?
Well, in the biggest sense, we already have some of that in place. But the kinds of initiatives we're talking about will need mitigation plans in the first instance. So having alternatives to sitting in the construction zone as it's happening is important, and that's a transit strategy in many places. But it also includes work at home and alternative shifts and time of day and those kind of things. We today have that program, our Transportation Demand Management Program, that is funded by the DOT. Is pretty aggressive there, but certainly improving that through additional. In the broadest sense, that's a education, communication, and marketing plan to let people know what's out there. And the program does call for, and we continue to press for more resources to do those kinds of things.
I've seen presentations you've done about how you're trying to remake DOT and really change the culture here, and I would think, from generating support in the business community or elsewhere for the big plan, people need confidence that you can pull it off. So could you just talk a little bit about the changes that you tried to implement at DOT? Obviously, from the business community standpoint, people care a lot about measurement and metrics. and really customer focus. And you touched on that a little bit earlier about your customer focus, but maybe just expand on that a little bit.
Absolutely. Obviously, this DOT commissioner is the first of a kind coming out of a transit background where, as a transit operator, all you had was customers and customer service, or you didn't have a business. And so I do come at the DOT with one of the principal objectives around customer service. That means a lot of things. That means how we treat each other inside, you know, from how finance supports construction or whatever, to how do we deal with outreach and communication. So communication becomes that secondary number two in importance. We have to be open and honest and, you know, transparent about communications and be open and willing to do that, so that in the end we have businesses and users of our systems that know and can trust what we say we will do, that can get good outcomes in terms of service and service delivery. And that is something that you know, I've talked about since I've been here. And there's some very significant demonstrations of product there, you know, in progress. First, probably the most dramatic and important to the business community, particularly the development community, is our Office of State Traffic, which was, by all telling and by state law, we were told we had to fix it. Permits for development would take months and months and months, sometimes a year. And the backlog was enormous, and to the point where I think we were named you know, the least friendly business part of all of state government. That's probably not a good plaque to put on the wall. Right. Not where I want to be. Well, we took, along with many other state agencies, DEEP and DECD and others, motor vehicle, have very seriously embraced the lean approach to business improvement and process improvement. And that process today has, at least 60-some projects underway. The time frame from beginning to end is often under 30 days. Sometimes we'll deliver it in days. And the reason we have so many instead of none is because we're open for business. The demand to actually get projects done and know that they can get outcomes is generating more work, which is the best measure I can tell. Okay. I look at a map of all the things the State Traffic Office is working on right now. It's amazing. The state is open for business because we can help and facilitate that.
It's a huge mindset change.
Yeah.
And getting that word out, as you said, is important because it's important for the business community, it's important for the public to understand that you're undertaking that mindset change. And you mentioned to me earlier, for the first time in 120 years, you actually surveyed your customers.
For 120 years, the DOT was afraid or said we don't need to actually do a public opinion poll about what people think. And fascinating. It's fascinating. Not surprising. Yeah, we actually plow roads pretty well, and they believe that. But what didn't come out well was this trust in spending money wisely.